and welcome to the first episode of the ZeroFX or ZeroFux, however you want to pronounce it, I guess, podcast. So we are joined today by the lovely Juan Spinel, Rob Lancaster, who is one of the ZeroFux team, and myself, Amy Stokes-Waters. I will allow our esteemed guest to introduce himself briefly before we kick off our conversation around privacy policies and alcoholic establishments. I wonder why we picked that as a topic. Who knows? But yeah, Juan, would you like to introduce yourself?
So my name is Juan, and I was working in hospitality as a systems administrator when GDPR was going live. So I was affected by the whole getting a strategy running and making sure that we did have the compliance things going down there. And now I work as a systems engineer in the healthcare industry, which is a whole other bag. And I am here because Amy has the smoothest DM slides, quite literally. Yo, are you a GDPR expert?
Yeah, what's wrong with that? Did it work?
So I'm not a GDPR expert. If you think you might need or might be affected in any way as a business by GDPR, absolutely get a lawyer. Anything like I say was from a very specific perspective where we had data that stayed within Europe, and there was no like complicated things with transfer to the UK or the US. It was all within Europe and technically just stayed in Switzerland. So very niche experience there.
This is definitely not legal advice, is it? This is definitely just three people chatting and sharing their own opinions rather than offering any significant solutions to anyone who might need them.
I thought that we brought him on as like a legal expert. Did I get that wrong? No, sorry. No, I didn't think that. It will just be.
I don't know, poor Juan. Really not fair.
Wanted to talk about this topic because I got interviewed for a BBC article around, they were looking at some privacy policies around some pubs in the UK and what the kind of data was that they were collecting and how it was being stored and how it was being treated. And I just found it was a really interesting topic. So I was like, yeah, let's do a podcast on it and have a chat about it as well. So some of the data that was being collected by some of these pubs, it was really interesting. They were collecting things like IP addresses. They were collecting usernames and passwords for things. They were collecting like what browser you're using, what OS you're using. And it was just, I found it quite scary, the amount of data that they were collecting and what the reasons were behind it, because they were called. Sorry.
So the data that Amy is mentioning here, IP addresses, what browser you're using, what OS you're using, this is part of the user agent. So this would actually be shared with the website anyways. And even if the website isn't logging this data, the hosting provider would be logging this simply as a way of tracking malicious attacks on the website. Usernames and passwords, I mean, you do need your username and password to log into a service provider. But when Amy suggested privacy policies and pubs, my mind went to the track and trace instead. Because you have places where this was just kept on a whiteboard or blackboard and erased as time went by. Places where they just had a binder. Of course, you don't know who has access to the binder, but it's not openly visible. People can't just snap pictures of it and then drop numbers or call people randomly that they don't know. And then, of course, we have the whole QR code scanning, where this is a completely different entity selling this track and trace service. And then, in the UK, it was found out that this data was then being used to target pub visitors.
Go on, Rob.
I was just going to say that the thing is, none of that is relevant to the services that are being provided. But unfortunately, the user who wants to go into a pub and have a glass of wine or a pint of beer, all they want to do is order their drink. And if
Mm-hmm.
they have to go through that rigmarole and tick the box and no, I'm not a robot, and yes, I accept the terms, you know what, when you're not going to care. You're just going to bash your way through as quickly as you possibly can to get to the point where you can do what you want to do and achieve what you want to achieve, which is it's a bit unfair, because it's like saying to somebody, you can get on my bus free of charge. Oh, brilliant. I'm on your bus and it was free of charge. Yes, but now that you're on my bus, I'm going to explain to you all the things that are going to happen as a result of you being here. It's like, well, it's too late. I'm already on the bus. I've already committed. And I think the big companies, and indeed some of the small companies, aren't being fair to the consumers in terms of explaining and helping them to navigate their way through this mess of data.
I think that's a really good point where you're saying you've kind of already committed to it. So a lot of the pubs during lockdown were just doing like service at the table only. So you had to go on their website and you had to order your drink through their website because they were not having waiters coming to the table. So you've already gone into the pub, sat down, picked a table, then you got to, and then you have to sign up to the terms and conditions to be able to order the drink off of their website, even though you sat in the pub. So there's not really any need for them to collect that data about you, is there? Because you're already in the pub. They couldn't get a waiter over, but they decided to do scan and what was it called? I can't remember what you call it now. You scan a QR code and make the buy your drink through an app. So yeah, like you said, you're already committed to it. So you, at that point, you're not going to sit and be like, just give me a minute, kids. Well, we order dinner and I look through this privacy policy to see what data they're taking. Like, you're just going to go, yeah, please just give me a beer.
I think a big part of this is that the pubs are trying to follow some semblance of compliance with well, in this case would be COVID regulations rather than data protection regulations. And there's a company somewhere that's selling them this service of saying, hey, you can limit contact between your clients and your wait staff by setting up this QR code. We're gonna sell you this for really cheap. It goes all through your domain, so as the user doesn't feel like there's something being fishy or anything like that. But the data is of course being collected in the backend, not by the pub, but some third-party company, and who's most likely going to be selling this somewhere else. And then I think the question is, who's responsible about this? Is it the pub who's trying to respect health regulations, or is it this third party trying to sell the data?
Well, I think it's even scarier when you look into some of the detail of some of the privacy policies that these places have. And one of them that I read said, you give us all of this data at your own risk. Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. And we might transfer it outside of the EU. And I'm like, well, no, that's not. I shouldn't have to go on your website to find out that you're going to send the track and trace data that I'm giving you in the pub, that you're going to send that away outside of the EU. I shouldn't have to. The onus shouldn't be on me to go and look into that shortly, when the risk is that your data is getting transferred all over the place.
So I think this really shows the issue with having so many external parties providing these services. So I don't think that it's the actual pub that's trying to sell off your data, especially not if it's a small pub. It just happens to be that they've purchased some service to help do this because they wanted to have something simple that made a good user experience. So if you're a customer, you go there, you can get the full menu, you can order food, drinks, get a quick service. For you as a client, you're happy about this, and this is what you're going to be experiencing rather than all the technical things that are happening in the background, mm-hmm. which the pub in the end has no control over because it's all being done by some third company in the US, Eastern Europe, India. Lots of places are handling these kind of things, and these companies are telling the pubs, yeah, our things are GDPR compliant, and because of course, if you tell the pub, hey, I'd like you to delete my data, the pub's gonna try and wonder for 30 minutes, what do we have to do? Give those guys a call, and then from some interface, your data is no longer going to be accessible to the pub. But I mean, Amy, you're in sales. If we imagine that Rob has set you up with some Excel spreadsheet for you to look at your potential contacts, and someone says, "Hey, I don't want to be contacted by you anymore," Rob's not going to delete that. That information has way too much value. All he's going to do is put a marking somewhere so that you can't see it anymore, and he still has access to it.
Well, it's kind of like the whole unsubscribe thing, isn't it? Like, for me to not contact Rob anymore, I have to know that he doesn't want to be contacted. So I have to have his information and not be able to contact him.
That's the thing.
Absolutely.
And I think Rob had mentioned this at some point, that if you hit unsubscribe, you're sending a hell of a lot more information to them. And many companies then say, "Hey, are you sure you wanted to unsubscribe?"
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they want to find out the reason why you want to unsubscribe. So then they're collecting more data about you, which then they can then nonsensically store somewhere to probably get breached at some point anyway.
That's the thing, because all they're doing when you unsubscribe, they're not deleting your data from it. They're just saying somewhere, some flag, not subscribed, true. And then this way, when they're sending things out, it's not included, or your email address is not included, but they still have all the data, which is definitely
and
a pain.
if they chose to sell that data on elsewhere, they will just sell it on, and there'll be a flag on it saying, "Company flag Amy, this person has unsubscribed from." Well, I don't care. I'm company flag Rob. I've got hold of your data. I don't care that you don't want to hear from Amy. I'm not Amy. I'm Rob, and you're going to hear from me for the next 40 years until you unsubscribe. At which point, I will simply sell the unsubscribed data on again because it has a monetary value. And what I find most disappointing about these regulations, GDPR, but actually it's all regulations, is that for the regulation to exist, someone somewhere must have pushed it too far. Someone somewhere must have gone beyond what everyone else considers acceptable behavior for a government or a series of governments to put in place regulation. Regulation only comes when enough people have got it wrong, deliberately or otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, they do though, don't they? You have tales of companies like ringing up old ladies constantly with like marketing crap, trying to flog them stuff, but you unsubscribe from their service and they still continue to call you. I mean, I've had it loads of times, and I keep threatening them with like legal action if they don't stop ringing me.
So GDPR gives the users the right to be forgotten, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head now. I'm really sorry, but there was a guy in Spain who had some financial troubles, and when you Googled his name at the time, the first thing that came up was that he had financial troubles. And so he tried to take Google to court about this, to say, "Hey, this is no longer the case. I'd like to have this removed." And Google essentially said no. And the guy went on again and pushed and pushed and pushed until the court said, "Hey, now get rid of it." And the thing is, even though Google did get rid of those links, of course, he's now the face of the right to erasure. You have this right to say, "Hey, I don't want this data about me to continue being publicly accessible." It's always going to be publicly accessible. I mean, there's not just one search engine, but you can make it a lot harder to find.
Yeah, and with the Wayback Machine and other concepts, the data is there. It's accessible. But that has there's a double-edged sword with that, isn't there? Because as an innocent person, and I use the term innocent very, very loosely, we all have the right to be forgotten. We all have the right to not have our innocuous past or our behaviors shared and scrutinized. But what about if we're not innocent? What about if we're not particularly nice people? What about if we prey on youngsters or prey on old people or whatever? Should we still have the right to be forgotten? Because there is perhaps an argument that says if you've been convicted of something, that conviction should be publicly available.
Yeah, is that not information that's in the public interest though? So you can't get rid of it, I think. I don't know.
And this would be then made available through the country. So if you wanted to have that taken down, you would have to go through the proper chains within your country. Assuming we're talking here about legal cases.
Well, it's like when they try to get these, when in the UK you can get what's called a super injunction. I don't know if they've banned them now, actually, where basically like footballers were doing morally questionable or slightly illegal things. And then
not necessarily just footballers. I hate
there's a lot of footballers that were doing it though, and they were then taking super injunctions out against like the whole British press, so that the British press couldn't post anything about it, couldn't like write anything about it. So a load of MPs got really pissed off with it, and in the UK, if you go to in the House of Commons, everything that they say in the House of Commons has to legally be recorded into a document called Hansard, and it's like just an entire like list of every discussion that they've ever had in the House of Commons from like when it started. So these MPs got really annoyed. So to get around the super injunction, they just started talking about it in the House of Commons because the super injunction doesn't apply to them. So then it kind of negated the whole point of it. But I just thought, well, yeah, it's ridiculous. Like there's a right to be forgotten, but it was also, if you're in the public sphere, then and you do things that are of public interest, newspapers are going to write about it. Like that's kind of the double-edged sword of being famous.
I think the right to be forgotten relates more to, for example, I know Amy and I know Rob, and maybe Rob starts writing some slander about Amy, saying that Amy's selling products that don't work. And you can say, hey, this is not true. Please get rid of this.
Definitely not true, just so
I'm sorry for putting that out there. Amy does. I have no idea what products Amy sells, but I'm sure that it's perfectly good. But this is where you can say, okay, no, this is not true. And even though it's going to be very difficult for you to get Rob to shut it down, you do have now the tools to get search engines to no longer be providing these services about you. So, because of course it's an attack on your reputation, and then you can potentially also leverage these with the hosting provider to shut the website down. Historically, it's still going to be there. People are still going to be able to find it if they want to. But if someone wants to say, hey, what does Amy sell? Something you're going to get is, oh, Amy has lots of connections within my field, and I'm going to go ask them about it. And they're going to say, oh, hey, yeah, Amy's a top person. She knows what she's talking about. And I stand by what she bought, or as it were, instead of what the first thing you see is 1-star rating, horrible person, was really mean on the phone, which is just people being, well, trying to have some sort of influence on the internet because maybe they didn't have the means to purchase a product.
But that's, I mean, we drifted slightly off, which doesn't surprise me even a little bit, because in all those instances that we've just started discussing, we are talking about where people have made the decision to do something. So you've made the decision, the right to be forgotten. You've made the decision to say something about Amy or read something about Amy. We're going back. We're talking about groups of individuals who actually don't have any say over what's happening, and this, I think, is a different scenario. I mean, it's very clear when people are in a position of power or financial wealth, and they can manipulate situations. It's all well and good. We're talking about your average Joe or Jane who wanders into a situation and unknowingly is handing over reams and reams of data with the assumption that it's all okay.
I think this demonstrates that there's been an absolute breach of trust between the service providers and the users. If we take social media, you hear every week about some data leak, data scrape, who knows what else. And the latest one, I think, the latest one that most impacted me was Facebook, because the phone numbers that had been released were not people's phone numbers that they'd handed in, but those that were used for 2FA. So people wanted to connect, they wanted to have that security, and some people have a number just for getting those SMS tokens. And that was the number that was released. It wasn't even their personal number, which is really a weird weird thing to have made public. And so this is the case where you say, you trust these companies with your email, username, password, transaction history, but in the end, you have no control over who's going to be looking at your password, how many people were fired, how many engineers were fired from Facebook because they were stalking women. I mean, this is really scary. And
this was a thing.
I saw this a couple of weeks back. I think there were something like 5 or 6 engineers that were fired last year, if not more.
Absolutely nuts. That's crazy.
And these people have absolutely access to who they are, where they are, what places they hang out at.
I think like what you're talking about there is really big businesses, and I think they should have more. You'd expect them to have more responsibility and be better at doing this. But I think actually, when I look at like the track and trace thing, when I went to the local pub next door to me, I wrote my name down on a piece of paper and stuck it in a bucket. There was no way she was keeping them pieces and them names and paper. There was no way that she was using that for marketing purposes. You know what I mean? She was definitely just being like, I've got to do this. This is the easiest way of doing it. The pub that I go to is full of old men who wouldn't be able to use a track and trace QR code. Like they struggle to just talk on the phone, never mind like use an actual iPhone. So that was the easiest way of doing it. And I've got genuinely, Maggie, shush. I've got genuinely zero thoughts in my head that she's used that data for anything else other than she had to keep it for 7 days or whatever. Whereas the other pub down the road, they have got a QR track and trace system. It's a Marston's pub, and I'm sure that they've kept any bit of data they could keep their hands on to use for marketing purposes. I'm not 100% sure that's the case, but I doubt they got rid of it after 7 days or whatever it was.
So you mentioned that they were putting your, I'm guessing, name and number in a piece of paper in a bucket. There was no check of your ID, so to check that your name was correct. So on the one hand, like they are not checking in on that side, like with their track and trace compliance. But I mean, you expect people to be providing the details because they also want to be informed if anything's the matter.
But it's a very difficult call. Yes, I want to be informed if there's a problem, but do I want to just put my name and phone number in a bucket in a pub?
When the track and trace thing started, there were lots of people saying, hey, get a burner email address, try to get a pay-as-you-go phone number just for these things, because you don't know where the data is going to end up. And if some telemarketer is trying to call a number that's no longer active hopefully by the end of the year, it's no longer a case of this, telemarketer is trying to call up a number that doesn't exist, it doesn't bother you.
But this then starts to create a very unfair society, because, if you look around this chat, the three of us are, I hope between us, we are reasonably tech savvy. We certainly all know somebody who could help us with various elements of our tech world, but the majority of people wouldn't even consider the idea of getting a second phone just so they can go to the pub. Not to mention, let's put aside the cost of doing that in the first instance, but the idea for the majority of people, the idea that you would have a secondary phone number that you would use to hide behind, a burner phone that you would hide behind. First of all, for most people, that's going to immediately sound criminal, just because of the way it's used in cultural reference. But the finance side of it, the aggravation side of it, and I think that then creates a split society. You have the digital savvy
Mm-hmm.
and the digital unsavvy. And I think the digital unsavvy will become more and more vulnerable to being preyed upon by people within or above the industries. Hello, mate.
Hey, Maggie. I think that, this really shows with the tech companies. There's the case of saying, they're able to build so many things. They're able to provide the users with a product, with an user experience. And we think that the only thing that's happening is what we see, and we're not seeing the whole aggregation working in the background.
Yeah.
And, this is the whole, the scientists were so busy worrying, figuring out if they could, rather than working out if they should. This is the whole pace, you get the whole ethics element brought into it. And I think this is something that's definitely going to be getting bigger and bigger, because as you said, IT or technology needs to be made so it's the same for everyone with the same ease of access. And we need to be able to explain to people what's being used and how it's being used. And maybe it's too late, maybe it's too difficult. I mean, as we said, you go through a track and trace that's being sold off through how many data brokers around the world just to create a report on you. I think in the US, for example, paying off your credit card makes your credit score go down, which sounds absolutely crazy to me, because it's saying you're better off having more debt than less debt.
That's exactly the same here. Like, if you don't have a credit card ever, you have a shit credit score. Whereas if you have a credit card, then you have a credit score.
Which, for me, that makes absolutely no sense, because it's saying not having it means you're not in debt. And, you can show your savings accounts, and you can show your income, and, that you're not living on overdraw. But
that's no good at all if your business is lending money to people. If you are in the business of lending money, you need to lend it to people who can't or won't pay it back on time. Because if they pay it back when they say they will, you're not going to make any money from them. Hence, having a credit card makes your credit score go up because you've relied on credit. It's an absurdity. It's not. So your credit score, in my mind, and this is a very much my opinion, a credit score is not a score of how credit worthy you are. It's a score of how low you're hanging on the tree as to whether the credit companies will pick you to target you. And they're not going to target the people who pay back on time. It's not in their interest to do so.
Staying on the credit card idea, so PCI, as I was taught it, so operations, for example, the credit card or debit card should never leave the client's hands. Now, taking this back to pubs, I don't think I've ever been to a pub at closing time where a credit card stayed in the client's hands, partly because they weren't able to get it to the terminal. But, does that mean that the pub is not compliant? Does that mean that they need to shut down?
Well, it's not
The
great.
answer is yes.
Yeah, and I was going to say, reading the letter of the law or the letter of the regulation, then yes, that would mean that. Whether in practical terms anyone's ever going to do that is another question.
No, and the reason, if you backtrack enough, you've got to think about why is this even an issue? Because actually, as a rule of thumb, I trust people. My opening position is 100% trust of everyone I come into contact with. That doesn't necessarily mean that I would give them my car, not because I don't trust them with my car, but because I don't know whether or not they are capable of driving my car. So capability and trust are not necessarily the same thing. But trust is 100%. So when I go into a pub and somebody says, or a restaurant, and somebody says, here's the bill, should I take your card? There you go, there's my card. And I won't think twice about it. But actually, I know of many situations where companies have got somebody inside who's taking that card, taking it back to the counter, photo, swipe. Full details have now been taken. and sold on. And that's why that regulation is put in place, isn't it? To protect from that situation or that potential situation.
It's not just bad information they take though. Like when I was younger, I went to the shop and bought some beer, and the woman was like, "Have you got any ID?" Obviously, that happens to me all the time now as well. I'm 32. You didn't get ID'd the other day, and I was like, "What the actual hell?" Like, come back here and ID me right now. Anyway, she took my driving license and then started writing my driving license information down in a book. And I was like, for what reason are you possibly doing this? Like, why? Even this was like 18 when I was a bit thick about stuff like data privacy. And even I thought that was really strange that she would be writing my address down, my driving license number. I was like, what do you need that for? Well, if you come in again, then you don't have to show us your ID, do you? I was like, but you haven't took a picture of my face on it, so I could just be lying and say I'm anyone else in that book anyway. Like, doesn't make any difference. No, like it's not. There's no valid reason you could possibly have for writing that information down.
So this brings us back to the. They're trying to provide you with a better user experience, or customer experience, because next time you go in, you won't get carded. The good thing is they're not putting this into an Excel spreadsheet, which they're then sharing across the world.
Yeah, that's true.
But you don't know how long it's being held for. That's way too much data. I mean, they could just take your name and say, Amy from across the street.
Or they could just like ask me for my ID next time I go in the shop.
Yeah,
they could, but how many people would be going, you saw me yesterday or you saw me last week?
Yeah, I do that all the time in the shop. But still, I still do get my ID out if they say, no, it's like a legal requirement. Because the law, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but in the UK, the law is if you get asked for ID and don't produce it, you don't get served. They can't be like, oh, I know you're so-and-so's son from around the corner, so you can just come in anyway. Like, that's not how ID laws work. So, yeah.
So I know in Switzerland they had, I don't know if they still have, test purchases. And kids, will go in and if they don't get carded, the store will get fined. Or get fined.
It happens a lot in the UK. Where I live, it's quite a big business. I'm trying to get my children involved in the test purchase industry. I think there's money to be made there.
I'll send Maggie in.
I would hope Maggie would get carded.
But then it works the other way around as well. So I've been in as an adult. Like my brother was like 14, so I must have been like 28. I went into the supermarket, bought some wine, and I was with my brother, and they were like, have you got ID? And I was like, well, I do, yeah. Well, you're obviously buying it for him. I was like, I'm buying a bottle of Merlot for a 14-year-old. Am I really? Does that sound like the kind of thing you'd be drinking? And she was like, well, I can't serve you because he's got no ID. I was like, but I'm not with him. Like, he's my brother. Like, what? It's like the equivalent of having my child with me. What is this? You've misinterpreted the regulations yet again.
Yes. But this is my fear, that the regulations get so diluted as they get passed down. So they get passed down from government through governing bodies, through associations, through senior leadership, through boards of directors, through CISOs, down to security, down to independent, down to the person who's opening the door for you, and they completely misunderstood what the regulations are. So, they've been told you're not allowed to hold a door open for anybody because of tailgating. Okay, no problem at all. So person comes along with a huge pile of books and their lanyard over their thing, and the lanyard matches the face, and the face matches the lanyard, and the lanyard says they're allowed in, but I can't hold the door open for you because I've been told I'm not allowed to do that. No, you've missed the point of what that regulation was for, but it wasn't their fault.
But Rob, did you know that person carrying the books, or didn't you? Because that's exactly how people try to get into the buildings.
No, but I'm saying they have got an ID.
Yes, but
No.
I mean,
It's a legitimate. Okay, it's
Fake
a
it.
legitimate ID.
but how can you check that it's legitimate? Do you have an ID scanner with you every time you go out of the building?
Well, in theory, all they need to do is touch it again. But okay. A bad point, poorly made. Thank you, Juan.
And no, I mean,
Yeah, you're right.
I absolutely see what you mean. But in this case, if it's someone you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
if it's someone you know, and it's always not quite the same thing as saying somebody that you've never seen before, or someone from a different department that you don't know, because then you say, hey, sorry, I can't help you, but I'm happy to call someone from your team to help you out, or if they can prove that they can open the door.
Yeah, like I'll hold your books for you while you open the door. That would be fine.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, there's ways around, but it's the I mean, I didn't describe that at all well or explain it at all well, but my point being that regulations have been so confused by the time they get down to the person who is responsible for overseeing them at user level.
I think this comes down then to having a proper appropriate strategy. You would have some leadership strategy saying, okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is how we're trying to accomplish it. And then these are the teams that are going to be affected by it.
That's fine. But when it was like the track and trace thing, we just got told, we're doing track and trace now. You've got to go find a system for it. It's got to be implemented. And if you don't, you can't open. So there's no way on earth that anyone could have a strategy for that. And the smaller establishments don't understand the regulations that they're trying to implement anyway. They most, like, I'm not going to lie, the pub that I go to doesn't have an information security manager. There's no person working there in that pub who's the InfoSec manager. They have a landlady and two bar women. They don't have anyone else working there. So I don't think they've really got any clue about what that data's for, the privacy policies that you're meant to be adhering
to.
So
this comes back to what you were saying at the beginning, right? With the privacy policies being very vague, self-referencing, saying that, we explain how we use this data within the privacy policy, and this is a part of the privacy policy.
Yeah.
And, it shows these companies might not have the personnel to handle this. And so, hey, along comes somebody saying, hey, I sell this product. All you got to do is, we'll have someone help you set it up. You don't need to worry about anything because we're compliant. And then, the pub's like, okay, hey, great. This way I've covered my regulations. I can open up again. And, they're not trying to rat out their customers. They're just trying to, get customers back inside and
they're trying to earn a living.
Exactly. I think this is where, you get like maybe some alternative things where people were having, as you said, a piece of paper in the pocket, something on a whiteboard, or even just a book.
I mean, I see that book thing now, even when I go to see customers, which hasn't been for ages actually. So before lockdown, when I used to go see customers, some of them would have a sign-in book. There's just a list of names and numbers and registration plates. And I'm like, I can see everyone else who's visited you this week. I can see who they visited, when they came in, when they left, like the phone number. Why should I be able to see all that information? And if I write my number down in this book, someone else can see all that information about me as well.
And fortunately, the majority of people are honest, decent people. But
I'm not. I screenshot it.
No. I mean, I
loads of them on my phone. I'm joking.
I mean, I look at a list of things like that, and I can work out instantly. This is great because it's easy enough to find out when an MOT is due for a vehicle. And it's easy enough now that I've got their mobile phone number to send them a text message saying, your MOT is due, click here to extend it by 2 weeks. And that's it, job done. Thank you very much. I'm in. Not that I would, of course, but people do. And this is the problem. And the people sitting at the desk have been told, you have to gather this information before we can let them in.
I've seen this in two different variants. I've seen receptionists who will give out a piece of paper to the visitor, and that piece of paper gets archived. Simply as a form of verifying who was there, like simple security measures saying, someone was here, they were looking for this person, we've called them up and told you to wait somewhere, and just got some contact details in case anything is the matter in the future.
Mhm.
I've also seen it with, as you said, like books or ledgers, and in this case, usually the people are there with you while you're filling it out, so you can't just snap a picture, or at least that's how I've seen it. Maybe I've been lucky. I'm not saying that people can't memorize phone numbers, but at least that way you can only see the one page.
Yeah.
You can't just go back to say, oh, hey, I know Amy was here yesterday, and oh, nope, you're on the wrong page, buddy.
I do quite a lot of work in schools, and unfortunately schools, particularly junior schools, are very poor at this sort of stuff. Just recently they've got better. Now you can only normally see one page at a time. They've removed pages as they turn them. But I remember going into schools and being able to flick through 5, 6, 7, 8 pages of previous days' visitors. And because the reception wasn't being watched 100% of the time, or the person behind the counter was busy on the phone, you could just scroll through, click, 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 or just run a video scrolling through and freeze it later on. It was all very possible to do. But again, it's because there's not an understanding. Why do we have to do check-ins in certain places and not other places? People talk about it being for fire regulations. Well, except that's complete and utter nonsense, because when you go to the theatre or when you go to the cinema, you don't have fire regulations. You don't put your name down. There's a count of people, but you don't put your name down. But also, when you go to the cinema, in the event of there being a fire, you don't have to hang around at the end to be counted. I don't know if anyone's been in a fire evacuation from the cinema, but when it's pouring with rain and 11 o'clock at night, you know what you do? You get in your car and you go home. You don't stand there waiting to be counted to make sure that everyone's out of the cinema. You should, but you don't.
Yeah, but people leave the cinema all the time anyway, so that count would be totally relevant, because people leave a film halfway through or whatever. So yeah, it's all just, I think it's stuff that people do because they think they should be doing it, but there's not actually any rhyme or reason to it, I guess, or like to the actual implementation of it.
Headcounts do provide a bit of help or an idea. For example, if you say we had 10 visitors, they were with person so and so. Hey, oh no, they left 2 hours ago, or there might be someone in the bathroom, because the people who are doing the checks inside the building, you don't know where they've been, and maybe you do need to go send someone back in again to double check somewhere. Again, obviously, that's a very specific case with buildings. Obviously, in a movie theater, someone can very quickly check that the theater is empty, second screening room, toilets, all right.
Yeah, it's like going back to pubs. I've never, until recent times, had to give them my name and number to say that I'm in the pub. But I've been in, like, there's been fire evacuations when I've been in the pub, and like you said, I don't sit and wait around for someone to count me. Let's go to the next bar where the fire alarm's not going off.
Exactly. And then the bar staff will just go check that the toilets are empty, that there's nobody stuck in there, close behind them, and then kick out anyone that's staying behind, closing windows and closing doors.
Yeah.
Headline this week is the UK government's super dumbass brave decision to publish details of their proposed changes to GDPR regulations and data privacy policy, with the UK set to introduce data adequacy agreements with countries such as the USA, Colombia and Korea, which makes about as much sense as the fourth Indiana Jones film. The government are looking to introduce regulations which reduce the need for cookie policies on websites and allow the flow of data outside the EU for economic reasons. Nothing like sneaking a crafty cookie in your browser, eh? The only saving grace here is the fact we've got a New Zealander coming to oversee it, and they seem to be pretty good at containing things so far, like a decent Peter Jackson film that doesn't have a twat load of hobbits in it. Next up is a story about the prevailing skills gap. We have news of a company trying to recruit for an InfoSec-related role. Nigerian-based threat group Demonware is looking for disgruntled employees to take part in ransomware attacks in exchange for a cut of the profits. The downside we found is they're paying in Bitcoin. And with such a volatile market, we'd like to see more diverse payment options, like Ethereum. We here at ZeroFX are also not surprised to find that the ubiquitous Nigerian princes are funding these groups. They appear fucking loaded, but yet to send us our money, even though they took our deposits. Scoundrels and vagabonds should be able to trust a Nigerian prince. What a world. Finally, this week's news roundup concludes with the news that China is introducing a limit on under 18 gaming. China's video games regulator has announced that children will only be able to play games for an hour on Fridays, weekends, and during holidays. To enforce this, games companies will be using facial recognition to ensure children aren't using their parents' IDs to gain entry to gaming platforms. Chinese parents across the country have been left wondering what the fuck they did to deserve such a punishment. Now to the weather. We stay classy, InfoSec community.
Starting in the southwest, the run of unusually warm weather we've had is resulting in a growing area of high pressure around Exeter. Nothing to do with the weather, that's just on the roads. Historically, of course, this is mining country, so keep an eye out for adventurous types wearing head torches. Moving on up into the Midlands, we see thick cloud cover, no precipitation to speak of, just badly named products and poorly designed user interfaces. The picture changes as we move further east. Keep an eye out for sin flooding, especially in low-lying areas. More or less the same picture moving north, though obviously wetter, colder, and different accents. Don't expect too much change as we move into the weekend. Expect patches of sunshine and broken cloud with the occasional shower. Misty in the mornings and, of course, a high chance of ransomware. Thank you.
Yeah. So going back to when you're now going into pubs now and the fact that there's these privacy requirements and handing over details and so on and so forth. Do you think this is something that's going to be retained? Because obviously once sort of the track and trace concept calms down, once COVID-19 becomes less of not a pandemic and something more along the lines of the flu, where it's somewhat more manageable, somewhat more expected, presumably, I don't know, but presumably we are going to have to check in less. So do you think at that point the pubs and the hospitality business as a whole are going to say, oh, thank goodness, we no longer need to retain and collect everyone's data? Or are they going to just continue to do it for, using your term, Juan, the user experience?
You know what? I actually think that they're going to stop doing it because I think they were getting fed up with getting closed down and being the place that everyone caught COVID, because no one did track and trace anywhere else. If I went to the supermarket, I never once had to be like, here's a lot of data about me, let me check in at this shop. It was an optional thing. Some supermarkets and some shops did put a sign up for, but most of them didn't, because as soon as the numbers were coming out, like, oh, everyone's getting ill in the pub. Well, of course we're all getting ill in the pub because you're not checking where anyone else is. That's the only place where you're tracking people going. They're all getting ill in the pub. Yes, that's the only place that they're going that you know about. You don't know anywhere else that they're going. It really wound me up when they were blaming hospitality for it. It's like, I don't check in anywhere else.
This sounds awfully like Donald Trump's argument of course our numbers are high. It's because we're testing so many people. If we tested less, we'd have lower numbers.
No, it's not that, but it's like we're legitimately doing no track and trace in any other.
I agree. The hospitality industry did get hammered.
I don't think that it's going to be kept because hospitality or good hospitality is based around the human contact.
Yes.
And you go to a restaurant and you have someone tell you, these are today's specials. This plate here is really good. This pairs really good with this wine. And you don't get that from your smartphone. You don't get that personal, counsel, as it were. No matter how good the applications might be, no matter how good the service might be, you don't get this personal element, and so you don't want to stay there longer. So you're gonna be consuming less. You're gonna go in for a meal, drink, and get out. Going from 2 drinks, get out.
Do you not feel though that that's more your high end, and maybe not even high end, maybe mid to high end establishment? Because even pre-COVID, there were pub chains who were requesting that you ordered via an app at your table. You scan the barcode and you put in what you wanted, and the content
less staff.
Excuse me, say that again, Amy.
So that they could employ less staff, yeah, because you were just
absolutely. So yeah, whilst I take your point, there are situations, and also there are situations where there are occasions when I go out, I want to be wined and dined. I want to be treated like a king, or at the very least like somebody slightly above the gutter. But I know my place.
So
but there are also times where I just want to go and have a beer, and I don't want to be talking to staff, and I don't want to be interrupted. I just want to get down and do what I want to do.
I don't know about the UK. Maybe I get to be in a little bubble here, but usually when there's something like that, it says service at the bar.
Yeah.
And the wait staff are only doing food, maybe, for example. But you still have someone that comes to your table to say, this is what's special. There's still someone who's going to be looking after you. Obviously, this is not something like going to McDonald's or Burger King, where you can just go to in French they call it a borne, like an order point, and then collect it. I have been to pubs where you would go order something, you would get a buzzer, and when the buzzer goes off, you can go collect your meal. But that's just because the pub is so packed that the wait staff can't go around carrying trays between tables. They say,
here they literally just have pubs where there is someone behind the bar pouring the drink, but you can just order. You go and sit down and order all of your food, all of your drinks off of an app. You never talk to anyone. Someone just drops a drink off, which I always think they're screwing themselves out of money, because I'm never going to pay a tip when that is the experience that I'm getting. Mm-hmm. But there we go.
The other thing is, if you go somewhere and, maybe they might have specialty beers or specialty wines, whatever. If you don't have that human experience of being able to discuss things with people, you can describe things as much as you want. It's just a block of text and there's no emotion behind it. And in the end, even if you're in the gutter, you do want that human contact. You do want that, someone telling you, hey, actually this thing here, it's really good, really recommend it.
So we think hospitality pubs are going to stop collecting our data. I'm not sure that I'm as convinced as you are, and I think they will maybe just find another. My fear is that they will say, this is great, we don't want to give this up, this is such a wonderful additional revenue. I think they will object to giving it up. But
I mean, if we go back to something like a fast food chain where you have the automated ordering posts, clients, computers, all you're doing is saying, I want to order this. They might be getting your payment information, but that transaction is managed by another party, not even by the restaurant. So that they're not getting that information. And then you go to the counter to pick up your number. So if we get that, I'd say it's not so bad. It's not ideal, but
There are, however, fast food restaurants that have a system where you place your order on your app. So you log into your app, it asks you for your location, which you can be vague with, but it does ask for your location. Obviously, it's picking up your phone data that's being transmitted. You then go to the restaurant, tell them you've arrived, so you've got your location data, so they can narrow you down anyway, just based on travel time. I mean, it's not a difficult calculation.
Yeah.
And as we know, these apps are fantastic. This wonderful concept of log in with Facebook. Oh, that's easy. I don't even have to bother doing anything. Well, yes, but hang on a minute. When you log in with Facebook, the app says you are giving this app access to your contacts. Yeah, but that's okay because I'm just logging in to order my burger and chips.
And I think, yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, have you heard of that application called Waze that does like maps?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Travel.
For some reason, that has access to all of your contact book. How the hell is having access to all of your contact book helping you get from A to B?
So I think that they use so they say that they're using that so you can send your contacts your destination, and they can follow you as it goes along.
Yeah,
If that's the
I'm not
case.
sure that I want
Sounds legit,
my
right?
5,000 contacts knowing where I'm driving.
Honestly, I think for example, signing with Facebook or signing with Google is actually a little bit scarier because of this data share between your service provider and the or the tech giant.
Yes.
I GitHub, I would say I don't mind so much. For example, it's perhaps something personal because maybe you limit where you're using it for. But as you say, if you're using, for example, something like signing with Facebook, suddenly Facebook has access to all your data and all of your every time that you've ordered food online. You know, they're already profiling you in so many ways, and now they know that you have your diet.
So what could the average user do to protect themselves or to lessen the impact or lessen the invasion on their privacy from these large companies? What could we all be doing?
So that's an interesting one because these huge companies, the people who are going to be using them the most now are going to be children, right? Most of them have terms of service that say you have to be at least 13 years of age. And I mean, who hasn't lied on the internet about their age? So, you know, they're just going to be saying, yeah, I'm 13, 14, handing over their full data, like, you know, full name, date of birth, and all these things. And whose responsibility is it to tell the children, hey, when you're creating something online, maybe don't use your real data? Or is it on the parents? Is it on the schools? When I was in school, we were told to watch out for predators, not for, you know, tech giants. I don't think that's changed, but, you know, is it on the parents then to tell the children about this, explain the risks, and, you know, sort of explain why?
But the parents are woefully unprepared. I mean, I'm a parent, Amy is a parent, and I'm in the industry. And apart from the fact that I couldn't explain to my teenage children anything and have them accept it, I mean, for goodness, you know, anything I suggest to them is going to be ignored anyway, just by virtue of the fact that I'm their parent. But we are unprepared. They're using social channels that I'm not even aware of. And by the time I've caught up with them, they've moved on to something else. And I'm not saying that as an old man who has no idea what's going on. That's just the nature of technology and also the nature of teenage.
So I don't know if you're gonna have Stuart Peck on as a guest, but
we might have actually.
But he would be an excellent.
I think we might have to.
He would be an excellent person to ask this because he's absolutely able to say, all right, if you want to scare your kids, these are all the things you need to show them. And, you know, I think if you're able to get that fear once, you're a little bit more careful, or you might be more open to listening. He really demonstrates lots of things. He explained how he was originally trying to hide his identity a bit online, and then it came to a point where it was just so exposed, he just had to roll with it and figure out, you know, damage control, which I think is, you know, something that as adults who've been on the internet is something we can do. You know, our lives have already been exposed, so all we can do is damage control. We can't, you know, you can't really make data disappear. But there's also, you know, you can give the younger generation the tools or the means to, you know, protect themselves online. It's not about your own security. It's not about hiding yourself online. It's just about, you know, saying, I don't want to be receiving 200 emails a day that I don't want to receive, and then, you know, missing the important ones because I've deleted everything. I think something else is we don't really understand how the internet works as an user. We just go on a website. The website works in a certain way, but the way data is being shared, we don't know what data is being shared. And so this, it comes again to, okay, the privacy policy is talking about IP address, operating system, browser, but they're getting this anyways because you're visiting the website as part of the HTTP request. So, and they're not going. And if they're storing that, they're just absolutely ridiculous because.
But the point is that they store everything because they can, which heads right back to what you started with. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
So I think they should, because there's a 99% chance it's being used to counter malicious connections. And it's not being done by the website itself. It's being done by the hosting provider or whichever service they're using to host the website. However, saying that you're using this to provide you a better user experience at the pub, what barman is going to know that you have a 1998 ThinkPad computer running Windows 3.1 lying at home because you're because you're too stingy to upgrade to something newer, right?
How the hell did you guess what I'm running this on?
So how you're displaying in 8-bit.
Amy, if you're running this on Windows 3.1, I am really impressed.
The camera quality on this really old. I think this has been such an interesting discussion. Have you got any final thoughts for us to kind of end the show with?
I think you asked about ways to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's obviously going to be, you can't protect everything. There are tools that help you protect yourself. So I really like Thunderbird. Thunderbird will check links. And if the URL is not the same one, so if they've written a URL that points to something else, Thunderbird will tell you, hey, watch out. The two links don't match up. Are you sure you want to follow through?
Oh, that's good.
And so, you can test if it's right. Of course, a scammer can just say, click here and make that go somewhere else. Thunderbird won't alert you about that.
Okay.
Password Manager will not let you fill in details on a website it doesn't recognize.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, once more, it's just little layers of protection. It takes some time to get them involved. And the other thing, maybe somebody else that you might like to meet is Dan Kohn, who talked about poisoning your data online.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole process of saying, okay, if you want to protect yourself, maybe don't share everything. You can share it, just maybe not in real time. And there's lots of women who've shared about this, about going to conferences and, they can't share pictures online as it's going on because they're going to get targeted. People are going to, try and find them and show off that they can.
Mm-hmm.
Someone I was listening to recently was Natalia, who was saying exactly this, don't share the places that you enjoy going to, because if people know that you go there every Thursday, that's when they're going to start showing up and following you home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had some interesting similar experiences to that this week that I won't go into, but yeah, I agree. Don't share where you're going with people. So yeah, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. I think that's been a really interesting discussion. We've managed to stay vaguely on topic as well, so I'm pretty impressed.
Not done badly.
Yeah. I think we might have derailed at some point somewhere in the middle, but I think we brought it back. So yeah, it's been a really great conversation. So thank you very much for being here.
It was a pleasure.
And so tune in again in a week's time on the 23rd for our next episode.
Where I'm not sure who we're interviewing yet, but I'm sure we'll find someone. Maggie wants to say bye though. Say bye.
Bye, Maggie.
Absolutely. Goodbye.